On today's episode of Locked On Wild, words that begin with the letter D that have led the Wild down their current path this season.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is happening, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, in the wake of the Wednesday night loss to the Los Angeles Kings, we take a look at some words that start with the letter D that have led the Wild down their current path and put them in their current position outside the postseason looking in. My name is Seth Topal, your daily Minnesota Wild insider, credentialed Wild media member, and catching up on as much sleep as possible. After a late one against the Los Angeles Kings last night, the Wild lose 6-0, and playoff hopes beyond life support. Like, it's bad. It is essentially all but mathematically eliminated at this point. But there are some common themes that have been prevalent throughout the season in which have led the Minnesota Wild to this current point and have led them to, by and large, a season that has to start the season, to start our words that start with the letter D, disappointed. And so let's just start by looking at the depth. Depth is one of the, I think, most eye-opening things that we have seen this season due to the sheer volume of injuries in which the Minnesota Wild have had to overcome this season. Every single player, with the exception of Marco Rossi and Brock Faber, have missed time this season for the most part. And you're having to fill various positions in the lineup. But I'm not even necessarily talking about that. I am talking about scoring depth for one, because we're still in 70 games into the season. We're still dealing with the same issue, in which if you have a player whose name is not Kirill Kaprizov, Eriksson Ek, or Matt Boldy, you're getting inconsistent levels of scoring. And it has, for the most part, not been enough when those guys are not absolutely clicking. It's been a struggle for this Minnesota Wild team to accumulate wins in those cases. I want to just look at a couple of things to just try to help further score this point. Let's just take the top 4 scorers for this Minnesota Wild team. We'll start with Kirill Kaprizov. In 33 games this season that the Minnesota Wild have won, that Kaprizov has played in, he has 29 goals and 27 assists. He's got 56 points in 33 games, including 10 power play goals and 15 power play assists. So in 33 games, he's got 25 power play points and 56 total points. In losses, in 30 games that Kaprizov has played in which have been a loss, 7 goals, 14 assists, 21 total points, 3 power play goals, 6 power play assists. So 21 points in 30 games, 7 goals in that span, 3 power play goals. And so if Kaprizov is on, the team, like if he's doing a majority of the heavy lifting, the Wild have been able to win games. But in games that they lose, it's largely because the opponent is able to keep him on the quiet side. Eriksson Ek, in wins this season, has 21 goals, 23 assists, 44 points. In losses, in 34 games, he has 8 goals, 8 assists, and 4 power play goals, 2 power play assists. So 8 goals in 34 losses that Eriksson Ek has played in. And on the Eriksson Ek side, I know he does a ton of other things that factor in from simply a scoring perspective. But what I'm just trying to do is, again, when he's really cooking, him and Kaprizov especially, they have been able to combine to do well in wins. But again, in losses, if teams are able to keep them quiet, it's a lot for this Wild team to try to overcome. Zuccarello, in wins this season, he's got 36 points in 29 games he's played that have been a Wild win. 8 goals, 28 assists. Also 20 power play points. In losses, 3 goals, 16 assists, 19 points in 31 games, 9 points in the power play. Matt Boldy, in wins, 18 goals, 24 assists, 42 points in 32 games. In losses, 6 goals, 7 assists, 13 points in 31 games. Again, if you can quiet about 4 guys, the rest have just not consistently been able to step up and fill in. And that is the mark. Depth is the mark of a good team, is having other options that can step in when your top line players, when your go-to guys are quiet. Now, Edmonton, they've obviously got Connor McDavid, and the amount of nights in which he doesn't factor in on the score sheet are as rare as a solar eclipse. But if you look at what their top level guys, like let's just go through some teams and the top level scoring that they have at their disposal. Jason Robertson leading the Stars with 70 points in 70 games, 24 goals, 46 assists. Matt Duchene has 23 goals. Joe Pavelski has 24. Roope Hintz, 26. Wyatt Johnston, 26. Mason Marchment, 19. Tyler Seguin, 21. Jamie Benn, 13. Miro Heiskanen has 7. Thomas Harley has 15. And Evgeny Dadonov had 12. So the number of players that have double-digit goals, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 players, double-digit goals for the Dallas Stars this season. Let's take a look at the Colorado Avalanche. Again, you've got Nathan MacKinnon leading the way. He's got 117 points, 42 goals, 75 assists. Just insane numbers by Nathan MacKinnon. Mikko Rantanen has 37 goals. Cale Makar has 17. Valeri Nichushkin has 25. Jonathan Drouin has 12. Devon Taves has 11. Ross Colton has 14. Logan O'Connor has 13. Arturi Lehkonen has 12. Ryan Johansson, before he was traded, had 13. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 players. And then Miles Wood has 9. 10 players with double-digit goals. Minnesota Wild on the other side of the coin. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Connor Dewar had 10. He has been traded, though. Marcus Johansson has 9. And so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 currently on the team. Players that have 10 goals or more. But then there's a fall off even after that. Johansson with 9. Then your next closest after that is Brodin has 7. Middleton has 7. Faber has 6. Gaudreau has 4. depth up and down the lineup to where if your top guys draw the top attention from your opponent, you have another line that's capable. Like this is what we talk about in like, how would you, if by some miracle the Minnesota Wild would make the postseason, what do you draw up to stop them? You stop the Kaprizov line. Keep them quiet. Throw as much attention as you can on them to keep them off the board. You likely win. You very likely win in that instance because the scoring depth just has not been there by and large this season. And it has become more and more evident as the season has unfolded. You've got multiple players on the third and fourth lines that are on runs in the last 30 games in which they have 4 or 5 points. And so if we start to ask the how did we get here question, depth is a key reason as to why the Wild got to this point. So depth, a huge factor. Discipline is another. And I'm not going to dwell on discipline too long because Isha Jerome of the Soda Pod is coming on tomorrow's show, and we had a dandy conversation about this very topic. But I will discuss it a little bit here today. So we'll move on to the next D, which is discipline, as we continue today's episode of Locked on Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked on Wild is brought to you by Game Time, with a little bit of a blast of winter hitting us here as we move through the middle portion of March. Great time to beat those late winter, early spring blues by going and seeing your favorite artist in concert, going to see the Minnesota Timberwolves play down the stretch before the postseason. And the best way that you can find great deals on tickets is by heading to Game Time, because Game Time is trying to make the ticket buying experience as stress-free as possible. They offer last-minute tickets up to the day of the event, plus flash deals, and they allow you the opportunity to see what you'll see from each seat at the venue. And they don't blind you with any of those hidden fees at checkout. What you see is what you'll pay all the way through, no matter if you buy 1 ticket or 10. Game Time is here to help in that area too. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked on Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day, or in this case, we appreciate you joining us for Locked on Wild After Dark. Continuing to go down this road of how did we get here? And I'm not going to go down this too much because Isha Jerome of the Soda Pod, for his weekly appearance, joining us for tomorrow's show. And we had a great conversation about the special teams on this discipline topic. We had a fantastic conversation about the discipline on this team and why this penalty kill continues to just get torched all season. So we'll talk about that for tomorrow's show. But, you can go discipline can mean a couple of different things. Obviously, this Wild team is penalized a ton. Third most penalties in the league, and large part because of the 80 penalty minutes, the 79 penalty minutes that they took against the Los Angeles Kings. Most of that at the end of the game. But discipline can also factor into a bunch of different areas. Discipline to be able to get yourself ready for a game. Get yourself ready off the opening face-off to be ready to go when the game is magnified and means the most. I still vividly have the quote from Marco Rossi after the St. Louis Blues game stuck in my head. When Rossi said after the game, he said, we are still not putting full games together, and like they weren't ready to play at the start of that game against the St. Louis Blues. Like, you're 68 games into the season and you still are putting yourself behind the 8 ball with slow starts and giving up early goals. That's discipline. Not putting yourself in position to get called for penalties that are detrimental to the overall team success. That's discipline. Knowing that an opponent is likely going to be able to pick off a pass if you blindly and softly throw it back into the middle of the zone, that's discipline. And so we just see this team that by and large is way too loose, especially on the puck side of things, way too loose with forcing passes up the ice, behind the back passes, between the legs passes, no look passes. Way too many instances in which you're just making things easy for the opponent to be able to take the puck. And in many cases, they're in, like, they grab it in, like, not at a standstill. So they're in motion when they grab the puck and are able to more quickly move back the other way up the ice. Like, all these little things are discipline. And we have seen way too many instances this season in which this team has lost their composure because they take an early shot. You know, the analogy we use a ton is the boxer who takes a blow to the head early on in a fight and just completely forgets all of the key fundamentals about boxing. Like, they just all of a sudden just start swinging recklessly to try to make up for getting hit early. How many times too do we see the number of shots that this team takes that are not accurate, that are wide left or wide right, enough to where they don't register as shots because they don't pass between the posts. They aren't accurate enough to be anywhere in the net area. That's discipline, to not throw the first thing that you see at the net and have it be wildly inaccurate to where it's not a quality shot attempt. That's discipline. And so that has been a staple of this era of Minnesota Wild hockey, is that they've been in the top 10 in penalty minutes the last few seasons. And you go as recently as like 5 years ago, they were in the bottom 10. And that is just something that can be attributed to the players on the ice not being disciplined enough, while not having the same level of skill. There are skill mismatches on this team for sure. But you can beat a team that is more skilled than you are by being disciplined. And so scoring depth has been a huge problem this season. Disciplined play has been kind of the calling card of this group over the last few years. And the other part of this, decision making. That's the other D that has been a real problem this season. And we'll look to some specific examples of decisions that have backfired for this Minnesota Wild team. We'll talk about that to finish today's episode of Locked on Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked on Wild is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up with peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home the win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day, or in tonight's case, the rare Locked On Wild After Dark. Thank you for joining us as you are watching the NCAA tournament unfold. We appreciate you being part of the Locked On Wild community here each and every day. So we're talking about these words that start with the letter D that have majorly impacted what has happened this season. Depth. We focused more on scoring, but you can certainly talk about rosters as well. Discipline. Both in penalties, more so in penalties. We'll talk about this tomorrow, but just in all sorts of different areas on the ice. And the final one is the decision-making, because there have been no shortage of decisions that have felt hasty, that have felt rushed. Let's wind it back to the end of last season. So trade deadline, Minnesota Wild acquire Marcus Johansson. Before the deadline, he comes in, and to his credit, he had 18 points in 20 games. Gets himself a 2-year deal to come back. And it's $2 million. Who cares? That part is not the problem. What is the problem is the decision to include trade protection in that deal, and the decision to continue to put Marcus Johansson in a top 6 role. And yes, the last 2 games that has changed. We're 68 games into the season. I can probably count on one hand the number of games in which Marcus Johansson has not been in the top 6 this season. I think off the top of my head, it's at 4 games out of the 66 that he's played. Another number for you, 39. 39 of 66 games, Marcus Johansson has had 1 shot or fewer. And yet the Wild continue to decide, the coaching staff or Bill Guerin or both, continue to decide to put him in a top 6 role, which, as we've seen with the scoring depth, that has clearly not been the right decision. How about the decision to sign Freddie Gaudreau to a 5-year extension? AAV is not the problem. $2.1 million is not the problem. You look at many other teams throughout the NHL, and that's just the going rate for those types of players. As the salary cap increases, so do the contracts. And so the $2.1 million AAV does not bother me in the slightest. What bothers me is the 5 seasons in which you are rewarding a guy for 2 years in which he played with some pretty talented line mates that were able to assist him in accumulating points. And yet you reward him with 5 years. Decision appears to have backfired. And so it's not only that, but it is the decisions that have been made throughout the season in which you decide to continue to roll with the same pieces in various spots. You decide to opt with veterans as opposed to younger players that can offer you a little bit more in the speed and quickness area and dare I say, give you some upside. And it's the decision by this team. And I know semantically, like, what else are you going to say? But it is the decision to continue to try to pull everybody back in. And to make us try to believe that this team is back. You go on a 3 or 4 game winning streak. Hey, the team is back. The team is back. Or now we just got to go win. Now we just got to go beat the St. Louis Blues. This is not just one game out of 82. Big game against the Los Angeles Kings. We got to just go beat the Kings. And then you'll be in a position to tell everybody, hey, we're right back in this playoff picture. And just the decision to not have the words match the actions. Like the decision to, hype these games up properly, but then not follow through with the play on the ice. That's a decision. And so it would be one thing. It would be one thing if the tune would be, and yes, Bill Guerin said some of this, for the tune at the trade deadline, you sell off 2 pieces. You sell off 3 pieces, actually. But then you throw in the still expect this team to compete all the way to the end. Still believe in this team. Still believe in these players who you decided to lock into longer term contracts. When I think everybody knows that you're in need of doing a little weed trimming for this franchise. And it's likely that comes this season, this off season. It's likely that there is some sort of like, okay, we got to step back and really take a good look at this thing. It's possible that there is some of that this off season, but the decision to, considering the constraints, the decision to continue to go full throttle, the decision to continue to go win at all costs, which has led to players playing through injury, which has led to guys clearly not being 100% out there. Like this has all been there since the season started. This has all been right out in the open since the season started. We just wanted to believe that those signs were just coincidences to what we've seen. To be cynical, another word that starts with D that you could throw in for this season is defense, because the defense was an atrocity at the beginning of the season. And you've got really talented players on that D core, but without those players in the lineup, the depth guys have not been able to keep things afloat. And so the letter D bears some pretty significant impact on how this season has gone. But again, all of this was a choice. All of this was a choice that could have gone fundamentally differently especially had some of the decisions in the short term been treated a little differently than they were. So if you want to thank one thing in particular for the season spiraling out of control like it has, thank the letter D. And honestly, another layer to that, Dean Evason. That's another reason that this season got off to the start that it did. He was done no favors in how this lineup was constructed, how this team was constructed, but a lot of rigidity, especially early in the season. And so add that to the list of letters, things that start with the letter D that have weighed in on this season. Thank the letter D, folks, because that is how to most succinctly sum up what we have seen throughout the course of this season. That will do it for today's episode of Locked on Wild. Once again, thanks for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day, or in the case of today's episode, a Locked on Wild After Dark for you here this evening. We've got an episode coming up for you tomorrow. Isha Jerome of the Soda Pod joins us. We're going to dive in further to the undisciplined play with some statistics and a call for some accountability. So that should be a lot of fun. Glad to have Isha in the fold on a weekly basis here through the rest of the season into the off season too. So we hope that you tune in for that one. That one will be available first thing in the morning. So make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Make sure to follow us on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. We've got new episodes for you every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.